Hi guys, thanks for tuning in. Today we are going to talk about analyzing poetry using a strategy called TPFAST. The purpose of this strategy is so you can read, comprehend, interpret, and even appreciate the art of poetry. Because let's face it, poetry can be really tough. It can be really confusing and daunting when you first approach a poem. But on the other hand, it can be really wonderful. There are many wonderful things to be discovered in poetry. It's like it's a beautiful room that you just keep finding new beautiful treasures in. But the only problem is you're not sure how to enter that room. So the strategy hopefully will be the key for you to analyze and understand and, yes, even appreciate poetry. So to start, let's talk about the TPFAST strategy. Here we have your chart that you should have gotten on your Google Drives. So you can go ahead and take some notes while you watch this video. In TPFAST, it's an acronym. So the first step is to look at the title. You want to look at the title of the poem before you even read the poem. And you really want to think about the title and maybe predict the meaning of the poem based only on the title. Couple of things that I like to think about when I am thinking about the title is, what do I think the poem is about? And maybe does it raise any questions for me? And then I like to jot those down. And it's also fun because you can always go back later and see if you were correct or incorrect in your prediction. The second step in the TPFAST strategy is the P, which stands for paraphrase. So for a paraphrase, you really just you're not wanting to rewrite the entire poem word for word, or even line by line. You just want to come up with maybe a 1 or 2 sentence paraphrase of the poem. Or sometimes if the poem is longer or is divided into several stanzas, I find it extremely helpful to just write 1 to 2 sentences about each stanza. And remember, when you are paraphrasing, you don't want to get too deep into the poem yet. You're just entering that room. You're just diving into the poem. So you really just want to think about what is literally happening in the poem. You don't want to get into too much analysis yet. Just what is literally happening in the poem. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense at this point. Hopefully, by the end of the poem, you'll make sense of all of it. The third step in the TPFAST strategy is the figurative language. This is when you want to find and label as many of the figurative language examples or literary devices that you can find. The more that you can find and label, the better, because the more opportunities you'll get to really look at the poem and consider what the poem means and what the poet wanted to communicate to the reader. So just some examples of literary devices, again, to refresh your memory. These are your metaphors, your similes, personification, symbolism, all of those good things that you've been studying for the past several years. And then instead of just labeling all of them, what you want to do is consider how each literary device adds meaning to the poem. So up until this point, you've probably been labeling and writing even literary devices, but now we want to answer the question, so what? Who cares if there's a metaphor? This is when we want to really think about why the poet put a metaphor where he did and what it might mean. Just remember, poets are masters of the word, and they very rarely, if ever, say something in a way that they don't mean. They mean everything they write. The next step is attitude. This is another word for tone. So you want to observe both the speaker's and the poet's attitude or tone. For this, feeling words, emotion words work very well. A few examples here is maybe the poem is contemplative, reflective. Maybe the speaker or the poet is thinking about something that has happened to him or her. Maybe it's didactic, meaning that it's intended to teach. Maybe there's not a whole lot of emotion. They're just telling you for your own benefit. Maybe the poet is angry, maybe it's lighthearted or whimsical, and perhaps it's melancholy or sad. The next step is the shifts. This is when a speaker shifts an attitude or tone. So rarely does a poet begin and end in the same place. What a poem really does, it's the poet sits down and begins to write about a subject, and he or she has an attitude about the subject when they begin. And as they continue to write the poem, they start to they start to realize the lesson, or they come to that epiphany or the aha moment. So oftentimes the speaker or the poet will change attitudes. They'll realize something as they think about it. It's almost as if the poem is an entry in their journal and they're trying to make sense of their experience or of the world around them. So what I found, this isn't always true, but a lot of times the shift often occurs towards the end of the poem. I would say that most of the time it's between the middle and the end. Not always, but that's a good rule of thumb if you're looking for a shift. The next step is title again. So the title of a poem is important because it is part of the poem. It is not just something that is frivolously attached to the poem. So you want to examine the title again on a more interpretive level. So does it reveal anything more about the poem? Does it give you further understanding of what the poem is about or what the poet is trying to say? And this is always a good time to double check your prediction that you made when you first started this process. And finally, the last step, which is the most important, because this is what we've been doing all of this work for, is the theme. So remember, theme is the message or lesson about life that the author wants to convey. So remember, the subject and the theme are not the same thing. So sometimes I find it helpful to identify the subject of the poem. Perhaps the subject is love. So that would be the subject. So the theme would be whatever the poet is saying about love. So the theme is what is the poet saying about whatever the subject is? And remember, the theme should be universal. When something is universal, it can apply to everyone in all walks of life, from any time period, from any country. No matter who you are, you should be able to relate to it in some way.